Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonkson, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. We are talking with my good friend Greg, and we're talking about how to get the right leaders on the team. What do we need to look for? How do we need to operate that? What's the profile we're looking for? How do we get the right leaders on our team? Because the right leaders will make the difference. But before we jump into that conversation, I want to just let you know about Church Boom University. If you have not signed up for Church Boom University, do that today. Go to churchboom.org and check out the Church Boom University tab. It'll tell you all about it. There is just tons of master classes, resources we send you. It's an ongoing personal leadership development for pastors. So make sure that you check that out today. But let's jump into this conversation today with my good friend, Greg. Yeah, great to be with you. How can I help you? And what's on your mind? Let's talk about it.
All right. Well, my first question would be about leadership principles, teaching leadership principles to both volunteer and even paid, staff. So, of course, knowing that leaders, when you place them or when they come in, and that they have different ideas about what leadership is, they have different levels of skill and development. What would you say are the key leadership principles that a pastor should teach both their volunteer leaders, ministry leaders, and any paid staff?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I have a few thoughts to consider on that. And it depends on, if you're talking about leaders, you're talking about volunteer leaders?
Primarily, yeah.
Primarily volunteer leaders. Okay, first, I think that when possible, I don't think it's always possible, Greg, but when possible, there's a level that I think a leader should already be at before they are a leader in your church. Most churches have managers with leadership titles. They don't have leaders. I'll meet their team, and I'm like, they're not a leader. They're a doer. They're a manager. They're getting somewhat the job done, but if you're looking for them to grow it, expand it, recruit, develop, build teams, they're not going to do that. So knowing, I think, level one, which is, I'm kind of backing up from your question a little bit, level one is, what do they need to have to be a leader in the church? I think is a great question to ask yourself. Like what level, obviously they're going to grow as a leader, but what's that level that they need to be at, kind of the attributes they need to have to even be on the team? Secondly is when it comes to developing leaders, I think you need to identify, like you talked about, what are the topics or the categories. Now, I think the natural kind of Christian ministerial thing to say is they've got to be people of character and people of integrity. And, sometimes if I don't mention that, people are like, well, that's important. I'm like, I'm assuming we all know that's important. So let's put that aside for a moment, because I think we kind of should all know that that's important. If we don't all know that's important, we have a whole different problem. But, okay, put that aside. Now, let's talk about that. The things that I think are important when you're talking about dealing with leaders is here's the things I want them to know and want them to grow in. I want them to know how to build teams. Okay, do they know how to build teams? Do they know how to pour into their teams? Do they know how to recruit volunteers and onboard them properly? Another big part. Do they know how to recruit, but do they know how to onboard them properly? There's a way of doing that not just, hey, you're on Planning Center now, and make sure you show up the first and third Sunday of the month for greeting. Like, there's a better way of doing it. So do they know how to build things, not just people and not just teams, but they know how to build things? In other words, this doesn't exist. How do we get it to exist? I'd want them to know that. If they're a leader, I want them to know how to make tough decisions. I'd want them to know how to deal with conflict. How do we deal with conflict properly? How do we deal with it in a healthy way? I'd want them to definitely know that. I'd want them to know the importance of alignment and unity, and how, and then I'd want them to know how do they handle their frustration when they're not happy. Typically, they'll talk to someone on their team, which is not a good way to do it. So I'd want them to know that. So off the top of my head, those are 7 or 8 things that I want them to know, and I want them to learn, and I want to train and teach them and make sure that we're reading books that cover that category together. We're having teaching times that cover that. Now, those are the things I want them to grow in. And remember, I told you, but there's also certain things as like, I expect you to kind of already be at this level to be a leader at this church. I'm already kind of expecting you know how to do that. Now, I want you to grow, there's no doubt. But the example I always use is, because I love baseball, been to all 30 stadiums, is in the MLB, you know, if you and I own the Braves and we decide to pull someone up from the minors, you know, or maybe you and I are the coach or the manager, and the owner's like, so you're pulling that guy up from the minors. Yeah, he can't hit the ball or catch, but we think he can grow in that. Like, no, we want him to grow. He's 22 years old. We want him to grow, but he already better be at this level. He's not going to get on the major league field. Right. Now, he's going to grow, but he's already got to be at this level, you know, and take that and move that over to the church world. It's like, I'm already expecting them to kind of have this sort of foundation, and then we're going to grow them from there. And then you got to know what those foundational pieces are as well, because otherwise you're putting managers in leadership positions, which only equals frustration when you do that. So those are kind of the thoughts. So what's foundational, and what do you want to teach them? So foundation, they already have to have it. And then teaching was those 7 or 8 things that we listed a minute ago.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow.
And you got to know the difference.
Right. Yeah, between the foundational and the...
Yeah. What I call that is, here's, I'll just kind of give you an example. I call it foundation, future growth. Foundation, so future growth. So if I was on a whiteboard, I would do this. I would make a line, okay, and then I'd do one of these lines like this. So this is foundational. What words would I write under that line? Okay, that's foundational. Like, to even be a leader at this church, this is foundational. Future growth, that's the 7 or 8 things that we just talked about. Gotcha. Foundations for me are going to be things like, I want them to have relational intelligence. That's foundational. I'm not looking for them. I mean, obviously I'd love for them. Remember, foundation, future growth. I want them to grow in it, but you better already have a level of relational intelligence.
It's hard to teach.
Oh, it's hard to teach. It's a nightmare to teach, you know? Yeah. And so if they don't have that to start with as a foundation, they're not going to, I would suggest they're not in your leadership team. That's me personally. Yeah. So you're talking about relational intelligence. You're talking about, are they naturally attractional and gravitational? You know, do they have that ability? They walk in a room and people want to follow them. Like, those are some foundational things. And then you got your future growth. And for you and your wife to know, as you're leading the church, here's 3 or 4 things that we have to have. And here's what they're going to grow in. The reason I like the foundational is this. You have to identify them. And the reason it's important to identify them is because what you don't want is when you get desperate, you'll ignore the foundation if you don't know what they are. If you like the person, you'll ignore the foundation if you don't know what they are. And just because you like them doesn't mean they need to be a leader, and just because you're desperate doesn't need to be a leader. Once you create that profile, that becomes the test of, like, you and your wife going, should we put that person in the position? Okay, let's walk them through the 3 or 4 foundations. No, they don't have it. And if they don't have those foundations to some level, you're just asking for trouble. Right. You're asking for potential relational trouble. Man, you put the wrong person in the wrong seat. Now you got to get them out of ministry, which is a lot easier to get someone in that isn't get them out. And so you got to deal with all that. So having a foundation is sort of it's a filter for you, so you don't get desperate and you don't just put someone in a position because you like them.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay. Yeah, awesome. Wow, that's very good.
Yeah, excellent.
A new way to think about it. And,
yeah, absolutely. It's a different way of thinking about it. Like, well, wait a minute, what do they need to have? Because I think that we tend to put people in positions based on faithfulness.
right.
And faithful is great. It's a awesome, amazing, wonderful quality, but it isn't the only quality.
Right.
You know, it's like, that guy's faithful. Make him the sound man. He's faithful. He doesn't know a thing about sound, so why are you making him the sound man? Oh, this guy's faithful. We're going to put him in charge of all first impressions, greeters, ushers. He's faithful. He doesn't know how to rally a team. He doesn't know how to raise up volunteers. He doesn't know how to build, but he's faithful. You're asking for trouble.
Recipe for disaster.
It is, and we all do it because the big filter for us is faithful. And that's a great quality, but it can't be the only thing.
Right. Excellent.
So, yeah. What else you got?
Okay, question. What, this is about first-time guests. What are some key factors to getting more first-time guests to return, knowing, of course, not every first-time attender is going to return or stay, but what are some of those key components that have to be there to get the people that should be returning and just getting them back? What are,
Yeah.
What are,
That's great. So there's a few things. And I love talking about this. We've talked about it several times on the podcast. I think it's just something to constantly go back to. There's a lot to say about this, so I'll try to package it as best as I can. First is 95 out of every 100 people in your church, any church for that matter, hasn't invited anybody to church in the last 12 months. 95 out of 100. Think about that. Let that sink in for a moment. So your greatest chance of a person inviting someone is the first 9 months at the church and their first 9 months of Christianity. You got 9 months. After that, it plummets to the percentage of people that will actually invite someone to church. Okay, that's a big problem. So you understand that's a foundational issue. When we call invite, I always call it a culture. There's a couple issues. One, I think you have a major culture problem if you're not getting enough guests. There's a culture problem. Every church has a culture, but not every church has an invite culture. Every church has a culture. Every organization has a culture. Every company has a culture. But it doesn't mean every church has an invite culture. So there are a few things that I like to do, that I encourage you to do. Number one, you have to start changing the culture of the church. And the way a culture is always changed is by the same three things. Stories you tell, heroes you make, things you celebrate. Stories you tell, heroes you make, things you celebrate. That's how you change culture. So what I tell people to do is, okay, let's start with, you need to start where you can, at least once a month, if not twice a month on Sunday. You got to figure out through an interview, through a video interview, through a live interview, through something, you got to figure out how to start telling stories. What do those stories look like? It could be someone that started coming to the church 10 months ago, 9 months ago, whatever. They maybe their life was a little bit of a mess. They came to church. They got rededicated their life or gave their life to Christ, whatever. Then they started serving. Everybody's loving the story. Everybody's feeling emotional. But the last question we're going to ask is, now tell us how you came to the church. Because every story we tell on a regular basis always comes back to, and how did you come to the church? Oh, really? And they invited, how many times do they have to invite you? Oh, really? Wow. And Ben, and they kept inviting, and they're sitting right over there, right? Or they don't even come to church anymore. They moved to Arizona or something. It's like, fine. But you're telling a story about somehow it ties into that invite culture. So now let's go back to the original thing I said, Greg, is how do you change culture? Stories you tell. There's a story. Heroes you make. Who's the hero in the story? The person that did the inviting. And things you celebrate. You're celebrating this. So it's like, man, Jessica, we're so glad you're here at the church. You've been here a year, but who invited you? Oh, Linda did. Linda's here today. Linda, you get what our church is all about. You understand who we are. The more you start telling stories and celebrating and making heroes out of people, the more likely they are to do it. And so now that's an important part. So what happens is you want to, in a perfect world, tell stories with a live interview or whatever. Somehow you're going to make that story known once a month, better if twice a month, better if every week, but someone that is somewhat new to the church. And the reason that is because it gives that new blood, new vibe feel. When you start introducing new blood and then always pointing it back to invite, these stories, new blood does two things. New blood creates new blood. It just does. The more you start telling stories, the more people are going to invite people. And then you got more new blood. And then you got more new blood. New blood also excites the old blood. Let me tell you why. Because, we both live in Southern California. We've probably both been to Disneyland countless times. We both aren't that thrilled. But when my granddaughter was almost 3 years old, she's big time Mickey Minnie. We got to take her to Disneyland. So here's the thing. Disneyland doesn't mean that much to me. Seeing it through the eyes of someone that's never seen it before, that's what makes it exciting. You want to see the people that have been around your church forever get excited? Let them start seeing Jesus through the eyes of someone that's never seen him before. That's where it gets exciting. So you're telling stories, newer people, you're pointing it back to invite. You're going to start changing that culture. Now, I would add a second thing, is when these people do the inviting and guests show up or whatever, make sure that your card, if you're not doing this, I'm just going to say it for anybody that's listening that maybe you're already doing this, but make sure your card, make sure your QR code, whatever you do, make sure one way or another you find out who invited them. Because you're not only going to do a follow-up to the first-time guests, you're going to do a follow-up to the people who invited the first-time guests. So let's pretend I'm the pastor and someone says, Greg Boatwright invited me to church, whatever, they write it down. You're just a guy that, works a normal job. So I'm going to call you. You're probably not going to answer the phone. I'm probably going to leave a voicemail. And I'm going to leave a voicemail on Monday. Greg, hey, this is Pastor Chris. First of all, you've never gotten a call from me, probably. Hey, Greg, this is Pastor Chris. I just wanted to leave you a quick voicemail and just say thank you. Tom and Susie said that you invited them to church. They wrote it down. I don't know the whole story behind it, but I just want to say thank you for bringing them. Thank you for reaching out to them. Thank you for doing what you do. You get what we're all about. Thanks for being on the team, man. You're awesome. Have an amazing day. Boom, you hang up. You're done. Now, you do that consistently, Greg, for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months with the people that do any inviting at all. What you'll see is they'll start inviting more people, and they'll start bringing them up on Sunday morning to introduce you to those people because they want more of the affirmation. We all live for it. But you're only rewarding what you want repeated. Everybody focuses on, I got to follow up this is our first-time guest follow-up. I'm like, everybody's got it. We do a letter, we do a text, we do this, we do cookies, we do that. I think do all of it. That's great. But what about the people that are bringing the first-time guests? Because in all reality, from a business standpoint, they are your salespeople.
That's good.
And if you know anything about business, you can have all the business you want. You better take care of your salespeople because they're generating all the income. It's like a Verizon store. Better take care of your salespeople. Well, who created the phone? They don't raise money. Who deals with the tech? They don't raise money. Who answers the phone when there's a problem? They don't raise the money. Who brings the money in? Okay, and now church-wise, they're your salespeople. So you need to put a ton of wind into their sales because they're salespeople and you want to make them win. Now, let me go back. Statistically, you have 9 months when a new person starts, they come to church, you got 9 months, and then it drops their chance of inviting church. Now, watch this window. You got a few new people, you're doing invite culture. A few people are showing up. You're following up with them, but you're following up with the first-time guests, all of that, and you're telling the story. Now you're telling the stories and you're following up with the people who brought the guests. That combined is going to bring a few more new people in. Now watch what happens. That 9-month cycle begins again. Then when a batch of new people come in a month later, maybe 5 new people join the church, 4 people, that 9 months starts again. The reason churches get stuck is because they haven't started that 9-month cycle in years. New blood creates new blood. Old blood will not create new blood. It just doesn't. You get once in a while, you get an old timer that brings people, but that is so rare. New blood will bring new blood.
Right. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, you got to get those who are those who have been here and maybe lost a bit of that vision to see, like you said, through the eyes of the fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you get new blood, just do those things. Tell a lot of stories and follow up with the people who invited them. And you'll start seeing a cycle of new blood, and new blood creates new blood. It does. I've seen it over and over and over. I mean, literally, we did this with a church that 2 years ago, we've been executive coaching them, and they've probably gone from, they went crazy with telling stories and crazy with the new blood approach and crazy on following up. I mean, I'm talking insane. And they've probably gone from, in 2 years, maybe 650, 700 to right around 13 or 1,400. They've almost doubled in 2 years. And they were at that 700 mark forever. And now it's just, boom, it just took off. I mean, they would bump a little, but now it's just, it's out of control. Every 3 months, they're breaking new records. New low is 1,000. New low is 1,200. And I've seen it also with churches there's a church up in Washington, 40, 50 people in the church, whatever. I just said, go at it. Took a few months. They started breaking the rock a little bit. I'm not saying it's huge, but they went from about 40 to 50 in the last 12 months to about 130, 140.
Creating a whole sales force of people.
100%. Got to realize who your salespeople are.
Awesome. Wow. Fantastic. Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. What else you got?
Okay. A question about church culture. What are some of the most effective ways to cast vision, communicate church culture to a congregation so that they really get it? It's not just the pastor saying it, or it's not just we have it up on the wall, but how do we as pastors get our people to just really take it to heart and remember it and those types of things?
Well, great question. Tons of information for that. So I'll just downloading in no particular order. One, always remember that culture is created at the top, supported at the bottom, lost in the middle. So the reason I say lost in the middle is new people kind of catch your culture really quick. Middle people are your key leaders and volunteers that have created their own opinion of a culture. So the reason I say that is if I am developing culture, the place that I have to make sure it's happening is when my staff, leaders, I'm working my way down, staff, leaders, and volunteers, because they'll drive the culture. A lot of guys approach it like, I got to talk to the church about it. I'm not saying you don't talk to the church about it, but I'm telling you, you'll get there a lot faster if you get the staff and the leaders doing it. So let's just take a church of 100 people, and they've got 3 staff, two or three part-time staff members, 4 or 5 board members, maybe 15 leaders. I don't know. So that's 20, 25 people. You get those 20, 25 people breathing what you breathe, grasping that culture, it will go down to the rest of the people without fail. It'll happen. Now, I think you should teach it. I think you should talk about it. I think there should be times that you review it and blah, blah. I get all that. But if you're going to approach the entire church, you're going to have a lot more difficult time than if you get these people on board first. Because culture, remember leadership, culture is created at the top. You, some leaders, and then it starts bleeding down. It's always created at the top. So it starts with you, you know what you want, then it works its way down. Once it works its way down, it starts working its way through the entire organization. That's why, like, I was coaching a very, very large church, 10, 12,000 people, and I was going to speak there on a Sunday, or I think it was, something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, there was a volunteer in the parking lot that I just greeted me. I said, tell me what your church is all about, man. He had no idea who I was. I didn't park in the first-time guest. I parked in first-time guests. I'm sorry. I parked in first-time guests, although I was a speaker, and I did that on purpose. Tell me what your church is all about. Tell me who you guys are. Tell me what you do, man. You know, he thinks I'm brand new. He didn't know that I'm the speaker. And I did that on purpose. I actually went out between services, came back, and did it again to a new guy. And and what was interesting is how much they answered the exact same question, and they answered it right. I know without a doubt they've never had a one-on-one with the pastor at a church that size. But they got it. And the only reason they got it is because the pastor taught it to the staff and also taught it to the leaders, and the leaders taught it to the volunteers, and now the whole church gets it.
Wow.
That's where you start. You always start at the top when you're creating culture. If you don't start at the top and you just present it to the church, you're going to have a much more difficult time.
Okay.
So, anyway.
Excellent.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's very good.
Any other questions? Anything else you want to tackle today?
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. Well, man, dude, it's so good to see you, Greg. And
good to see you.
Haven't seen you in forever. Hope everything is going well in your world. And
it is.
If I or Church Boom can ever help you, just let us know, man. We're always here to serve.
Thank you, Chris. Awesome content. Appreciate that today.
All right. Tell your wife I said hello.
Okay, we'll do.
See you, bud. Man, that was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, talking about getting the right leaders on your team. It makes all the difference. Don't forget to check out churchboom.org. We talked about at the beginning of the podcast, Church Boom University. You want to check that out. It is incredible information, masterclasses, teachings, webinars we do, resources we send you, all to help you personally develop. So make sure you go to churchboom.org and check out Church Boom University. We will see you on the next podcast.